Stuart Stevens here. It's my great pleasure to be with Simon Rosenberg, smartest guy in American politics, and also one of the best guys. Before we start, if you're not subscribing to Simon's Hopium Chronicles, your life is narrow and shallow and unfulfilled, and you should immediately do something about this to live a better life and be a better person. So go and subscribe, pay for it. It's Simon does an unbelievable job. I don't understand. I want to set up a camera inside his like office to see how he does this because I'd like to think he's doing the whole goddamn thing with AI, but I'm horribly afraid that's not true.
Just
So listen, brother, thanks for
yeah.
joining us. Not much going on. Yeah, we were talking before went live about this concept of framing winning and losing. Can you?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting idea. To talk about it.
Listen, I mean, I think that Trumpism and Trump's orientation, the way he sees the world, is very simple. Not surprisingly, he's a simple guy, right? In many ways, in that it's about winning and losing and weak and strong, or strong and weak, winning and losing. And it's the whole way that he sees everything. And we have to come to a place of understanding about that in order to defeat him, because we have to deny him the idea that he's winning or that he's strong, and to make him a loser and a weak man, as I describe him, a big blubbery baby man and not a strong man. And that this week, what the whole framing already, you can see it in the political press, is whether or not Trump is going to get a big win. But the question should be is whether or not we're getting a big win, whether the American people and America are getting a big win, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump winning or losing is immaterial to what's happening to the nation. And what is amazing, Stuart, and I think the thing that I struggle with so much in terms of trying to understand Trumpism, this manifestation of Trumpism, is how much we have become disconnected from him winning and us winning. Right, that he actually has no plan to have America win and be stronger and better, regardless of the MAGA frame. His plan is making us poorer, weaker, less safe, less free, and so his winning means that we're losing. And so the fact that those things have become completely disaggregated or at working against one another is shocking. And the fact that that Donald Trump really has no agenda that will make America better. Yeah. And so I think part of our message job this week is to define the winning and losing to be about whether America and the American people are winning or losing, not Donald Trump. And I think we can do this. I don't think this is a impossibility in our goal for the week. So even if he does end up getting this legislation passed and signed into law by the end of the week, which I think is still not 100%. I think there's still reasons to believe that if we work hard, we can disrupt this thing. But even if he ends up passing this thing this week, our message has to be, this was a huge loss for America and the American people.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to that. Since Trump took office, what has he done to make your life better? I across the board. I mean, things are more expensive. We're at war. Um, I don't think that this image of these mass thugs running around rounding up gardeners is something that makes people feel better, unless you're Stephen Miller sort of racist.
Yeah.
I don't see how it's really had any impact, and I guess that's reflected in his numbers.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess if people felt better, they would feel better about his job approval.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a corollary to this that just drives me batshit, and that is, how is it that we're in a national discussion, maybe international discussion, about what's wrong with the Democratic Party when we have a lunatic that the Republicans have embraced that is breaking every sort of norm and principle of what it meant to be an American president, a party that in a country that is becoming a minority majority party is 84% white, his last coalition, um, that's completely surrendered any sort of traditional constitutional role of the Senate, but there's a problem with the Democratic Party? I don't get this. It's
It,
crazy.
it is, and I think that one of the things I talk about a lot is that as Democrats, we have to recognize that every moment. Look, we all may have our frustrations and our disappointments among our leaders and people who are guiding us. And I certainly do, and we all do, I think. But it's a question of what you do when you engage in the public. And my advice to everybody is to keep the focus on Trump and the Republicans, and to not sort
Yes.
of not fall into factionalism, right? And to not use the energy that you have, the life force that you have, to create, to bring down Democrats and to talk down Democrats. We should be lifting each other up in a time of national emergency. And so what I do with Hopium and with my the limited energy that I have and power that I have is that I stay very focused on continuing to degrade him, to build us up, because he is the threat. And this idea that somehow, Democrats are the ones that we should be focusing on for all the various things that may disappoint us. It's an indulgence that we don't have time for. And it takes us away from the mission, which is that we have to do everything we can to mitigate the damage this guy's doing to the country and win as many elections and continue to get to grow our movement and make it stronger. Attacking other Democrats doesn't make our movement stronger, right? Creating factionalism and divide and discord doesn't make our movement stronger. It makes us weaker. And so we have to find the right balance, right, Stuart, between, this idea that, and again, it's not a question of how you feel. It's a question of what you do with your time and where your energy is.
Yeah, I this idea that you need focus groups to come up with a message for this moment. I mean, like, I don't get this. It's like somebody walking into the emergency room with a nail in their head, and they're gonna have, like, a house episode about, like, what's wrong? I mean, eh, if I were in the Democratic Party, I would say this is really simple. We wake up every day and we attack. And you don't attack because you think that one attack is going to do it. You attack because you represent the values of America. The other party doesn't. And it's not just Trump, it's Trumpism. And attack, attack, attack. And look, lost an election, but that happens.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that election in any way should be interpreted as some great national embrace of Trumpism. It was an election in which it was very difficult for an incumbent party to win. Presidential approval was at 40, hard to get over 2 points higher than that. Right track was 27 in the country. No incumbents ever won when it was below 45. Okay, and we know, like, Nikki Haley looks like she would have done better. So, hard time to win. You lose, that happens. Um, but don't look at it as a great identity crisis.
Right.
Um, I mean, look, the Republican Party has won the popular vote 3 times since '88.
Twice.
Twice, 2004, I guess, right?
Yeah. And Trump.
And Trump. Um, that's not a great track record. I don't get it. I mean, um, so to me, uh, what really strikes out when you look at what is sort of working on the Democratic side is passion.
Yeah.
And you've talked about this a lot. I mean, I think what happened in New York, it's interesting to me, Simon. In many ways, it resembles the '92 presidential race to me. You had someone, Cuomo, who, like George Bush, at a time when people were deciding if they're going to get in the race, was seen as formidably strong. So a lot of potentially good candidates didn't get in the race. One incredibly charismatic candidate stayed in the race and won. And but he had a lot of passion.
Yeah.
And I think it was more about that passion and more about that optimism than it was about any specific ideology. And the same with Bernie and AOC out there. Probably there's a lot of people there that don't agree with them on everything, but they like the fact that they're fighting.
I think that's the key, Stuart, is that let me just sort of take one step back because you just put a lot of stuff on the table. I think that if we were doing grand strategy for the Democratic Party a few months ago and said, look, by the end of June, early July, we want to have Trump, in the low 40s in his approval rating, we're there now. I
Yeah.
mean, he had the worst week of his polling. He's been heavily degraded. If we then said what we want to do next is make sure that his big ugly bill polls even worse than the tariffs and is now polling the worst of any issue that he's running on, which is his signature legislative issue that will be defining for him. Well, we've done that too. I mean, the Democratic coalition went to work to degrade this thing, and today it's now even more unpopular than the tariffs, which is a pretty incredible achievement. That's another kind of notch in our belt in terms of just how do we how do we proceed and be successful. These two things have happened, and it means now for Trump, in a time where he's been wagging the dog, he wagged the dog with his immigration enforcement. He thought that was going to cause the country to rally to him. Country rallied against him. He thought his big sad parade would help rally the country around him. That didn't happen either. And then he bombed Iran, and the country rejected that again. And he's tried these big plays to help his flagging presidency revive, and all of them have actually driven his numbers down further.
Yeah.
Right. And so now we have a situation where, this as a political strategist, their salvation, the thing that's going to make him strong and make him a winner again, is one of the most unpopular pieces of legislation in modern American history that is going to do material harm to the country. And so in order to get to a place where there's any version of what's about to happen that is somehow good for him, good for the country, good for the Republican Party, you just have to be living in an alternative universe, right? And I think it's why you've now started seeing Tillis and Bacon in Nebraska and North Carolina pull the plug. It'll be interesting to see what Don Bacon does in terms of voting this week, right? He's now liberated to vote against the bill when it comes back to the House. And for those watching today, I think the thing I can just say to all of you is that the line I have about this is that we're as a movement, we are not where we want to be, but we are further along than we feel. And the reason that matters, right, is that we have had wins. We've been winning in these specials. We've been winning in the off-year elections. We've been overperforming. We've actually degraded this bill, the signature bill of the Trump era. We were able to overcome the right-wing noise machine and define this bill. So if we can do it once, it means we can do it again. And it should be giving us far more self-confidence that we are starting to figure out how to navigate this Trump era in a way where we will get more wins than losses. We're going to have losses. It's the nature of the game. It's like the line I use about politics is like basketball. The other team's going to score a lot. You just have to score more, right? And so we've been scoring. And I just want to give everybody a sense that as we go into this week, what's incredibly important now is we all got to leave it all on the playing field. You got to call your senators, your House of Representatives, call your governor, call the Attorney General, call the Speaker of the House in your state. It doesn't matter if you have Republican legislators and governors and speakers, you are in a special place. Your voice will matter more than the Democrats, the people who have Democratic elected leaders. And so we need everybody now calling, protesting out of offices, sending emails, filling out the forms on websites. Just be as loud as you possibly can this week. There needs to be a roar of disapproval and they need to feel it coming from the American people. We need to rise up this week. It's very important. And call every day. It doesn't matter if you've called on Monday. You should be calling on Tuesday and calling on Wednesday and calling on Thursday. And based on reporting today, this thing may be in a more wobbly place in the House than I think people understand. There is a lot of concern about this in the House because what has to happen is if they pass this in the Senate in the next day or so, it will come back to the House, and it has to come back as the exact bill. If they try to make changes, Trump is gonna go crazy, right? So everyone, just so you understand the process, is that if it passes the Senate, it has to go back to the House. And the House Republicans, and Stuart, you should comment on this. The House Republicans feel like this thing's being jammed, and their bill just got dismissed out of hand by the Senate. Major provisions got knocked out by the parliamentarian. They feel like they've been treated, poorly by their older brother, and had the shit kicked out of them in the last couple of weeks, and they're pissed. And so, can we defeat this thing this week? It's in all likelihood it's going to pass. But man, I want to go to bed, at night knowing that I did everything possible to make sure that this thing didn't happen.
Yeah, so I mean, if I've been in this position before. If I was advising a Republican client how to vote on this, I would say vote for it and pray it loses. That would be the best politically, because this really is. I don't see a win here for him. It's not a win if it doesn't pass, and it's not a win if it does pass, because this isn't going to make anybody's life better. There's not going to be any immediate benefit that you're going to get from this. And in fact, and it's one of the things I think that um, we should all focus on more. You're paying the same in taxes or more, and people always think they pay more. I mean, in 2000, after Bush got elected, it was a big goal to cut income taxes for family of four made under 45,000. We thought that was a great public policy goal. Probably was deeply flawed. Everybody should probably pay something. Anyway, we would sit in focus groups during the 2004 election, and people who now paid no federal income tax didn't believe it because they paid more in sales tax. They thought they paid more in, every time that they bought something. So anyway, no one's going to feel like their taxes go down, and you're getting less for your money. Your services that you were purchasing from the government and your taxes are going to be reduced. You're going to have fewer Social Security offices. You're going to have longer waits when you call the Social Security. You're going to have a less uh, responsive, potent, effective FEMA. You're going to have less in Medicare. And, I live in northern Vermont, and I was up at a hospital which is very near the Canadian border. And there's this phenomenon of these hospitals along the Canadian border, New Hampshire, Vermont, that are amazing places when you walk into them. And a lot of what's kept them alive is government subsidies. And, see this all over the country playing out. So you're paying the same and you're getting less is a pretty simple argument, I think, in a non-philosophical, in a sort of transactional way, that they're downsizing what you get for the same amount. It's like buying a candy bar that now is smaller for the same price. Um, and I don't know if you're a Republican, what you and in a district that might be up for grabs, which I think is going to grow. What is it that you're running on?
Right.
I don't really get it. I any district that immigration is going to be a big plus is going to be a district that Republicans aren't going to lose anyway. And meanwhile, just sort of, I mean, I don't think we talk enough about this. You can see the Trump coalition shattering.
Yep.
Now, how in God's so they got up to 44% of Hispanics, which we got up to in 2004 with Bush, which interestingly, with McCain dropped down to 32%. And it wasn't like McCain was out there deporting people. So how is that coalition holding together? I don't think so. I
It's
mean,
not. It's not. I mean, if you look at the Economist YouGov weekly track, which is the most reliable weekly
yeah,
tracking poll, and I tend to like the polls that poll more rather than less because I feel like they're more
yeah, you
likely
got a
to.
broader sample.
Yeah, and you're also just captured. They're more in the moment as opposed to polling
Yeah,
once a
you
month.
should weigh yourself every day.
Yeah, right. They Trump has dropped 42 points in job approval with 18 to 29-year-olds. He's dropped in the mid 20s in with independents, Hispanics. He's dropped even more with black voters. He's dropped about 25 points with people making under $100,000 a year. And he's dropped 20 points overall in that poll since the first week of his presidency. I mean, it is dramatic, Stuart. I mean, what I were telling people in the beginning, you often hear in Democratic commentary, well, how can he be at 40? He should be at 20, right? But, there's a limit to how fast people were going to have buyer's remorse. People bought into him. They voted for him. And the idea that they would turn around 3 months later, 6 months later, and lose faith in him was always in my view too rapid. It was going to take longer. In 2017, we didn't really start to see his really structural decline until the end of the summer and the fall in 2017. But we're seeing it now. It's already happened. And this is what I mean. Like if we something very significant in our defeating Trumpism and in whatever way that ends up happening over the next few years, sort of a very important, necessary, but insufficient first step has taken place, which is that a majority of the country is now basically opposed to him. And is, and the test of that was the Iran bombing. When, it is, I've read, and I don't know this to be true, but I'm going to repeat it anyway, that this was the first major military action that was underwater on the first day,
I
meaning
was
that,
going to say that, man.
yeah, yeah, it was underwater. And that was a sign of how much faith people have
Well,
lost in
yeah,
him.
that surprised me, I will say.
Me too. Me too.
I thought blowing up nuclear facilities in Iran would be like, who's against that? Um,
Yeah.
to the extent anybody really thought about it. And so let me ask you this, why do you think that's happening? Why do you
People,
think that wasn't a push up for Trump?
you mean under Iran, the Iran
Under with
bomb?
the Iran bombing, why didn't he go have the normal kind of dead cat bounce?
Because
Um,
I think two. I'm going to give my best shot here. One is that I think that what's happened is that there were a lot of voters that wandered into his clutches at the end of the election in 2024
yeah,
who were not enthusiastic about it, right? They just chose him. They were low political information voters. His last messaging in the election, he was with Elon. He looked like a winner. With Trump, you get a better life and it make more money. And I think it was kind of very simple in some ways, right? The transaction that took place, and that Kamala was a little bit, I'm not so sure, right? And those people have left him. And the thing is, so we had a discussion a few weeks ago where you talked about how once Bush in 2005, once Katrina happened, that there was no way for him to recover because the people had lost so much faith in him. Is that I think that there is going to be this sort of through line with Trump about betrayal, about how he
it's
wasn't
interesting.
he wasn't what we thought he was going to be, that he is different, that he didn't necessarily represent himself truthfully for us. And where that began powerfully was on the issue that mattered most to voters in 2024, which was, are you going to lower prices, give me, and make life, better for me and my family? He immediately chose something on purpose to raise prices on everybody, and issued one of the largest tax increases in American history, without there being any debate or discussion. And I think the tariffs was a monumental political error because
Yeah.
it exhibited that he was lying, basically, during the election, that reducing costs and helping people get ahead was his central obsession. Clearly, that wasn't true anymore. And I think that was a major moment in people being like, wait a minute, this guy isn't actually what I thought he was going to be. He didn't tell me the truth. I thought he was going to be focused on lowering costs
You
and
know,
helping me get ahead.
no,
And
I mean,
and immediately he did the opposite.
yeah,
And I
it
think,
reminds me of George Bush's "Read My Lips, No New Taxes."
right,
And then once he raised taxes,
yeah.
um, the
Exa-
race effectively was over.
I mean, as you remember, Bush was, after the Iraq War, because I was part of the Clinton campaign in '92, and I remember, Stuart, you and I get to tell fun stories having been on the other side of things. But when I met with one of Clinton's top advisors in '92, early on in the campaign, and he said, there are. I said, what do you think is going to happen? And he said, look, there are three models for this campaign, right? One is Reagan, in '76, where we run and lose, but we bring a new idea to the party. The second is that, we win the nomination, lose the general. And then the third is that, we go all the way, we win the presidency. And he looked at me and said, there's only one person who thinks that's possible, and that's Bill Clinton. And this was, in February of '92, right before we knew we were going to win the nomination. And I just think about that because, when Clinton got in, Bush was up in the 90s or
Yeah, I
whatever,
know.
wherever he was, right? And so I do think that Trump has, whether it's through his delusions, whether it's through his age, whether it's through his extremism, his fanaticism, that he's drunk the Kool-Aid, that he's in this place where he believes, that everyone will bend the knee to him when nobody in the world is bending the knee to him. However we got here in this classic kind of authoritarian delusion and this authoritarian fantasy that he has about his strength in capital letters and his power the exact opposite is proving to be true. The world isn't bending the knee. The American people, the day he had his parade, which nobody showed up to, we had one of the largest protest movements in the history of America, a joyful, happy, conflict-free set of protests all across the country. This thing is not working the way they thought it was going to. There's no question, and they're angry about it. So what's happening now in this moment, this week, you're correct. If this bill fails, it will be a huge loss for him. But if it passes, it's also going to be a huge loss for him. And what he's done is that he keeps creating these kind of Vietnam situations where he has no way of winning and he has no way of getting out. And I think the same thing has happened with the tariffs. The same thing has happened with his immigration plan, where, he has to stay with it, even though it's driving his numbers down. There's a story the New Republic broke this morning about a 76-year-old Cuban man who'd been in the country for 60 years, had health issues, was brought into one of these ICE detention centers, and he died over the weekend, the 12th now person to die in ICE detention. We had a Canadian citizen die in ICE detention last week, only a guy who was only 49 years old, by the way. We still don't know what happened. But we had this story where down in Miami today, a guy who came here when he was 16 years old was being deported back to Cuba. No life there, no
So wait, he
family.
came in 16 when he was 16?
He came 60 years ago.
So
And
that means he probably came in the Pedro Pan airlift.
well, he came in the early waves, right?
Yeah.
And so he lived his whole life here. And he had apparently a minor drug offense from the early 1980s or something. And they arrested him and put him in this detention center. It wasn't the Alcatraz center that Trump is trying to build with DeSantis, the Alligator Alley, whatever it's being called, Alligator Alcatraz. And he died. And the thing is, people are dying now because they're indiscriminately, taking old people, young people, moms, kids, everybody, right? And they're just throwing them indiscriminately into detention centers. And this new bill, another reason why we have to work against this bill, the big ugly bill, is that it's going to create the ICE and DHS will have more money than the Marines.
Yeah.
And that we will have an unprecedented political police force with unlimited resources being turned on the American people in a way that will be really unprecedented in our history. And we have to recognize that these guys are acting lawlessly, illiberally, in ways that are completely contrary. There's probably never been such an overt portrayal of the country
Yeah.
than the way that ICE is operating now.
My dad was an FBI agent, and the idea of a mask it is so antithetical to everything that the law enforcement is supposed to be in the United States, and against all the movements that we've had in law enforcement, where now you wear body cams. We've gone to more transparency
Right.
and everything. But on this Cuban thing, I just have to take a moment here. I work for a guy named Mel Martinez, who was executive, basically mayor of Orlando. They call it like executive, whatever it is, chief executive of Orange County, which is mayor of Orlando. And he came to America on the Pedro Pan airlift. And the reason he came is that his family was very Catholic. He was a very good baseball player when he was a kid, big kid, when he was like 12 or 13. And Castro was obsessed with baseball. And they wanted him to play for this national team. He was a big star. And he kept saying, no, he doesn't want to. And he kept getting in fights the way kids that are 12 years old and really big for their age get in fights. So his parents took him and put him on a plane in this Pedro Pan airlift, not speaking a word of English, flew him to America. And the way this worked is literally in these churches, a lot of them Catholic churches to their credit, they would in Sunday say, okay, we have 10 kids coming in, who'll take one? And his foster parents just raised their hand that day. And he became an American. And he talks about just how difficult it was to assimilate and how his junior year in high school, no one wanted to go to the prom with him. Nobody did. And he decided this had to change. And he really taught himself to learn English by listening to those records that used to be of John Kennedy's speeches. And he then was homecoming king the next, became a big baseball star at Florida State. uh, and then got elected to the United States Senate. And it's such a hopeful vision of America. And compare it to Marco Rubio, who is an anchor baby, who is going along with this. And it's just such a betrayal. I don't think of any better word than what you're using. This concept of being Americans. And, J.D. Vance is the guy that just drives me crazy. With all this stuff about blood and soil and his Kentucky generations of Kentucky hillbillies he comes from. I mean, his wife's an anchor baby. His parents were not legal American citizens when she was born. And his kids, these beautiful kids he has, no doubt brilliant. Both his parents are super smart. This is America. He wants, how are they going to function in America where it's supposed to be about race and blood and soil? And he goes to Germany to champion a political party that would not accept his own children. There's just something deeply sick about that, and an ugliness about it. And I think, and just we got to close this. But one thing that just really strikes me about the trouble Trump is in is eh, who around him is likable. If you decided that Trump was overexposed, which happens in politics. Personally, I think if you decided that with Trump, there's nothing you can do about it. But who can they put out? These are just horribly unlikable people. Pam Bondi, Chrissy Noem. I mean, these are just comic book sort of
Villains.
small, ugly people who they're too transparent in the way they enjoy hurting people. You should at least be able to hide it more. And that's a real problem they have. And I think the Democratic Party has a problem with leadership, but I think the Democratic Party has so much deeper bench than the Republican Party. I think it's going to play out because ultimately talent really matters in politics. So,
Stuart, if I can close with just two quick
yes,
things
please.
I want to just get out there relative to everyone we discussed. I think one is people need to realize that on this immigration strategy, like we were saying earlier, that Trump doesn't have a strategy for success for America. There is no way for this immigration strategy to be successful. These immigrants, in many cases, can't go home because they come from countries that can't absorb them and don't want to absorb them. By the way, they often, in cases, left under duress, and so take this man who died in prison this weekend. He left Cuba 60 years ago. So he's 76 years old. What would happen to him? He doesn't have a place to live. He doesn't have, current family that he's close to. He doesn't have any way to make a living or feed himself, right? It's not clear the social safety net there will absorb somebody who's been out of the country for 60 years. And so what's happening is I just want everyone to realize that these people aren't going home because the host countries aren't taking them. And the Haitian government isn't taking Haitians. The Venezuelan government's not taking Venezuelans, right? The Nicaraguan government's not taking the Nicaraguans, and the Cuban, and so there is no way that this can actually work. There is no path where these people are removed en masse back to these countries. Maybe in Mexico, right? Because of Mexico's a more prosperous country and there's more family ties.
Just to pause it. So they say there's, I don't know, how many people here are undocumented? 11 million minimum?
Between 10 and 15 million.
Okay. Say all of them said, great, we're leaving tomorrow. There would be the biggest depression in the American economy.
Yeah.
These people are here, they're working, they're buying stuff. A lot of them are paying Social Security taxes they never claim. You take 10 to 20, 15 million people out of an economy?
It's 6% of our population.
It would collapse the economy.
It's 6% of our population, 5% of our workforce. But I'll just close by saying that I just think what people have to recognize is that part of the reason why Stephen Miller and Trump are escalating, getting increasingly angry, is that there is no possibility this mass deportation plan can work. And so what they're doing is they're in their fantasy minds, they're going to have these third countries, these countries to absorb immigrants in Djibouti and these other places. People would just get dumped. They essentially would be selling them into slavery in these countries. And I think that the inhumanity and of what's going on here is going to very, very soon. And I just want to end by saying that I think that Donald Trump is on the verge between the vaporization of AID and the purposeful killing of millions and millions of the poorest people in the world and what he's doing with immigration here in America. He is now becoming one of history's greatest villains. He's going to be up there with Pol Pot and Hitler and Stalin, in terms of having crossed over a line where the goal becomes mass death. And I think that we are in the midst of that right now. And it is, and I think it's why, as we get through this fight this week and battle against this terrible bill, Trump has made a decision to identify his legacy as being like Stalin and Pol Pot and Hitler, somebody who committed mass murder on purpose and crossed a moral line outside of that is inhumane. And I think this becomes, Stuart, the next fight after this budget fight is done, is that the inhumanity. I mean, what they're doing in South Florida, I'll just close with this because this is about to become a much bigger issue. There are about 1 million people in South Florida who are losing their legal right to be here this summer who cannot go home. And so they're going to be stateless. They're not going to be able to work and feed their families. Their kids are unclear whether they're going to be able to go to school. And they will no longer be here legally, and they can't work and they can't go home. What is going to happen to all those people, right? And not only is it going to have the impact on the economy of South Florida, that, as you described, where all of a sudden people are losing lots of workers because they don't have work permits any longer, but Florida is headed towards an incredible humanitarian crisis. And it's already begun by the death of this Cuban man this weekend and what's happening in the detention center in Miami, where the conditions are deplorable. So I think that, just to end here, everybody, we got to go fight this bill this week. We have to be reminded of the gravity of what's happening to all of us. And we got to leave it all on the playing field. And we got to keep working with Stuart and Lincoln Square and Hopium and all the good people that are doing amazing work here. History is calling us and we have to answer. And so put your head down, go to work this week, everybody. Let's see if we can kill this bill. It would be the best thing that could happen to America this week.
Yeah. None of us get to choose history, but history gets to choose us. Thank you, Simon. And again, everybody, subscribe to the Hopium Chronicles. It really, I think it's something that is going to be read years from now to sort of try to understand this moment. But you should read it today. And thank you, Simon. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Stuart.
All right.
Keep fighting, everybody.